all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Double Feature Podcast, where every week me and my boy David go back and forth trying to find the perfect marathon, the perfect weekend of movies, the perfect double feature. David, how are you doing?
Oh, Dean, I'm feeling quite patriotic today. We finally break into the American section. I mean, the rest of it will be the American section of war movies, pretty much. Well, no,
Because,
not really.
now that you think about it, like, the next week we're dealing with movies that are not American.
Yeah, I'm kind of going through my history Rolodex here, but yeah, at least for this week, we get to, well, kind of. It's tough. These movies were tough this week, so I'm sitting here like, I'm not gonna say that it was enjoyable, like it was entertaining, like it wasn't hard to watch, but it was only hard to watch because the subject matter itself is particularly dark or cold, some might say.
Like a cold mountain, as it were.
Everything comes back around.
Yes. All right, David, so why don't you tell people what movies we're watching this week on our March of War month?
Yes, like Dean said, we are watching Cold Mountain, and then opposite of that, we have watched Glory, two Civil War movies on our second stop in War Movie Month. I mean, what can I say? What a weird chapter of American history.
Just a little bit, you know, and they decided to commemorate them with these two movies. Granted, I ain't gonna lie, I'll open. Glory was a good movie. I liked Glory, so Cold Mountain was a little. I'm gonna wait. Did you not like Glory?
No, I like Glory. There's certain things about Glory that I particularly were interesting for me, I guess I could say. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say it's not a bad movie. It's a good movie, but I think it's interesting because I think this pair this week, I liked certain things about one movie that I didn't like about another movie, and I like things about that movie that I didn't like about the other movie.
Yeah, I could definitely see that about these two pairing of movies.
Yeah.
They're two on. I mean, they deal with both opposite sides of the Civil War, and in two very different views of the Civil War. So it's gonna be fun. So
It is, yeah.
yeah, David, why don't you tell everybody their favorite part, the log lines, what these movies are about, so they can kind of keep up with what's going on.
Right, to break into it. Cold Mountain is about a carpenter and a priest's daughter as they fight to survive the harsh, war-torn southern state of war in hopes that they will see each other again. Glory is about a northern captain as he takes the honored responsibility of training and leading the 54th Black Regiment through the heat of battle against enemies and detractors.
Yeah, and only one of these is based on true events. But all right. So where do you want to start here? Because this is a weird week for us because there's a slight miscommunication on what we were watching. So yeah, I'll say this: I watched Cold Mountain and then watched Glory. That was like the order I watched it in. Yeah, I just want to talk about how bad Jude Law's southern accent is. That is all I want to do. Oh my god. Also, what the hell is Renee Zellweger doing with that voice?
Yeah, because I also watched Cold Mountain to Glory. I think it's a good way to watch the movies. I think in a certain way you could probably watch them the other way around if you're going a more emotional arc route, if that's the way you want to do it. But I think it was a pretty good way to do it. Yeah, I mean, I guess if we want to dig right into Cold Mountain, the first thing is the actors that play the characters. That's certainly the most notable bit about this movie is that there's an all-star cast that at times it's just like kind of weird.
Oh, it is also weird the extent the cast goes. Like Jack White of the White Stripes is a
Yeah.
character is an actor in this movie. I didn't know he was an actor in any movie.
This is the first movie I've seen him act in, and it would be the last one that I would expect to be the first, if that makes sense. But
Yeah, because
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of. There's also some really notable actors in here that I was like, wow, they actually did really well, like Philip Seymour Hoffman or
Natalie Portman's in this. Or a returning Brendan Gleeson from In Bruges. He returns in this movie.
one of my favorite characters, definitely.
Oh yeah, Donald Sutherland's in this. I there's Charlie Hunman, the guy who people would know as the main actor from Sons of Anarchy. I think this was like his first big movie role.
Yeah, I mean, you keep going down the list, and they all end up finding a place in the story, which I'll preface this by saying one of the things I did like is that it was such a winding story at times, that there
Mhm.
were a lot of different twists and turns that kind of made it feel more like that, very Mark Twainish in its American epic quality. But yeah, it still it provides a lot of eyebrow raising moments.
Yeah, like I don't get me wrong, the story itself, it's cool because it feels like the Odyssey, right?
Yeah,
It kind of like Oh Brother Where Art Thou. This guy's just traveling through like the war torn South, trying to get home to Cold Mountain, which they say all the time. He is from Cold Mountain, and it's really interesting, all the cast of characters, all the weird stuff he comes across, and then you have it kind of intercut with the stuff going on back home. It's a really interesting way the story is told. But yeah, there's one aspect of the movie that is very um awkward, very awkward when you think about it.
go
So
ahead.
yeah. Oh, okay. Is it the fact that everyone in the movie, just every single like Southern person you meet in the movie is all totally not racist, totally against slavery? All the Southern people are like, racism? We don't have that in the South. What are you talking about?
Yeah, it is kind of weird to do a Civil War movie without really broaching the race argument here. I
And
mean,
they don't even talk about, like, I don't even think there's a slave character in the movie.
there's certainly not a black character in the town of Cold Mountain, from what I noticed. I will say you do see black people in the movie, but it's about in all of five shots probably
Yeah, we
because
see the
there's
thing of the escaped slaves in the cornfield, and then they're there and gone, and none of them have any lines, and it's really weird.
and you also see them once in an actual plantation at which also doubles as a war hospital for the South, but again, not really addressed at all. It's especially weird because the main character. I think there's allowed to be, as there probably were historically, Southern characters who aren't racist, but you can obviously tell that they try to broach the question that the main character, Jude Law's character, Inman, is struggling with that. Like the idea of whether or not the war effort is, all for naught, or if it's actually what they should be. That question's brought up, but it's just odd how they got kind of tiptoe up to it and they're like, we're actually telling a love story.
Yeah, yeah, because it's so weird because this movie has so much money, so many people behind it, and I think they could have approached the question, and they approached it in a very like caring way, but they just never went for it. Like I and it's I think the biggest thing is no one in the movie is like racist. Even the bad guys aren't like racist. I'm not
Outwardly, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not okay, I understand that this is a Civil War movie and I
So
am a
that,
white dude,
yeah.
but okay, it's a Civil War movie. It takes place in the American South, and the N-word is not uttered once in this movie?
Yeah, it's tough because like part of me is like, well, I guess that's not like a requirement,
I know it's not a requirement, and I
but even
understand
like
that it's the preconceived notion you have when you come into a Civil War movie, right?
yeah, well, I think the preconceived notion you're trying to get at with that is that there's not even like any language that goes into like the furthest they get is we got a war, boys, like and it's all and that the war is all about we're in a disagreement with them, so we gotta go march to fight. We know that's not what it was about.
Yeah.
I mean, really, it's kind of interesting though because it does raise the question for me because obviously, like we said, if there can be people who aren't racist in the South at the time of the Civil War, which there probably were.
I feel like that's a thing. People are complicated no matter where you are. There were
yeah,
probably
people are complicated.
conscientious objectors to slavery and the Civil War in the American South. Same as in the North. We can probably agree with that. Human beings are complicated, right?
Yeah, and
All right.
there's also the complication of like, well, I could see how some people might just want to fight the war, which is in some way, shape, or form, how some people view that war today, which is, again, there's kind of an elephant in the room that stops that argument, but it does still raise the question of, like, why make a Civil War movie if it's not really going to be about the Civil War? Like, could this have been a Revolutionary War movie? Or even a World War I movie, like we're going to watch next week. And it really does beg the question. It's like, why is a love story? Because obviously this is an anti-war film too.
Yeah.
That's certainly apparent.
I don't know of many American pro-war films made post-Vietnam. I don't know of many off the top of my head. Like let's go to war is a good thing, made post-Vietnam.
Well, the opposite one of this is.
I don't think the opposing one of this is an advocate for war.
Well, I don't think any movie truly is an advocate for war unless you're broaching on like propaganda. But I'm saying that Gloria wouldn't say it's like an anti-war movie.
I feel that comes down to how you view Matthew Broderick's character, Colonel Robert Gould. Because he's obviously dealing with like post-traumatic stress, and he's obviously dealing with having to basically face all the hardships of training a regiment that no one has faith in, and then having to get them ready for war and the fear of going back into war. I mean, there's a huge aspect of Glory that deals with post-traumatic stress as well as racism, and it's a very interesting character there. But granted, the end of the movie is him getting his guts back and charging headfirst in the battle. So whatever. Yeah. But yeah, I don't think Glory is a pro-war film. It does glorify the military.
Certainly, and for a good cause too. I mean, that's not to say that necessarily being pro-war means a bad thing. Because they're fighting for a righteous cause as the North during the Civil War. Obviously, they then also... I actually grew to like that movie a lot more once they broached the tougher questions of, like, Northern soldiers also being racist towards the black soldiers. And, those more complicated questions that, like you say, highlight the fact that people are complicated and that things are a dark hole. But,
yes.
Yeah,
we're out of 2020, man. You can be happy again, I swear.
Yeah. But the thing about Cold War that I do and don't like, and I'm kind of struggling with it, is that it is such a well-written film. Like, technically, going back through everything, it's like the arc of everything is really well-written. It's just that by the end of it, I'm being left with, well, what was the point?
I get what you mean. Because I think this is based on a novel. I'm pretty sure it's based on a novel.
Yeah, best-selling 1997 novel of the same name by Charles Fraser.
Yeah. And from what I understand, the movie adheres to the novel very closely, but that's the thing with a lot of novelizations of historical fiction. They get weird. But I do understand this movie, it feels like we're on this journey with the characters. We're following with this love story. It's this, war epic. He's a deserter. He's running away from the Confederacy. But then but yeah, I get your point. At the end of the movie, it's like, oh, what's the point?
Yeah.
It's a love story where, okay, can we spoil this movie? This movie's almost 20 years old. Can we
Oh,
spoil this
absolutely.
movie?
Both of these movies are worth spoiling. I mean,
Okay. Cold Mountain, at the end of it, he dies at the end of the movie. And it's like, oh no. And then, okay, you find out, okay, he had a kid with Nicole Kidman in their final, like, lustful night together. But, like, what what's the end of the movie? What's the theme? What's the moral argument of the film that is trying to put forward? War is bad? Is that the whole moral crux of this film? Is war bad, love conquers all, but not really?
yeah, I'm kind of left because like I enjoyed the end of the film after I got over the whole, the fact that it was tugging a little bit at my heartstrings because it's a sad ending, as any movie that requires sacrifices. Um,
And also the actors do a reasonable job. I'm gonna get to the
yeah,
point of talking shit on them aggressively in a minute, but their actual performances are good. Like, you do care about them. I cared
yeah.
about Jude Law throughout the movie.
I would say I enjoyed Jude Law's performance. I know our particular critique of his accent will come up in a moment, but the performance itself, emotionally, I thought was pretty well. And I was kind of thinking about this because I suggested this movie originally because I've heard about it so much before as being an example of a great story. It's been in several, for people who've probably read them, screenwriting books. And I think it begins to broach on that the movie is it's so geared to be what is a perfect story that it kind of ends up sacrificing, like we said, like a meaningful story. Like it may be all well and good that there's meaningful sacrifice to the story, that there's a cast of characters that are wide and diverse, that there's, well, apparently not so diverse,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
there's, twists and turns and all these things, but is it really actually about the Civil War by the end of it? And
It's one of those movies that feels like it was a right by numbers kind of thing.
a little bit, and by the end you're sitting there wondering, well, was the Civil War just so that they could have stakes and an obstacle along the way? Because really it's like, other than the elements, which is always a formidable foe, the deserter thing just kind of started to feel like, oh, they just needed something to make it harder for him to get home.
Yeah, which, I mean, like, I understand they want an overarching thing that makes it so it is very difficult. Jude Law does not have a good out to his situation.
Yeah.
Because being a deserter in the Civil War, basically what that meant is if you got caught by your army after you deserted, you're basically just shot.
Yeah.
They'd either drag you to the front and make you fight again, or they would just, like, shoot you dead. And I get it, and also it's interesting to see how they portray that era of time, because you can get some good cinematography. The opening battle scene is also crazy.
That was actually really good. Like I'll preface that by saying I didn't like the editing choice of going backwards and forwards in time. I didn't
Oh,
like that.
yeah, at that moment I thought it was very awkward.
Well, it's just like was kind of confusing. I wasn't quite sure if that's how the whole movie was going to go. So an odd editing choice in my mind. But the battle scene specifically and the opening scene on their own were very good, because that pool of blood sequence is like, whoa, that's something else.
It's epic. It is epic in every sense of the word. That the opening battle sequence is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I would even say that if we're rating, because most of these movies end up having opening battle sequences,
Yeah, I think every
minus maybe
war
a
movie.
few.
Yeah, I think every movie we do this month is gonna have their big showstopper battle scene. Yeah.
Yeah, and if we're going by opening scenes, like I would even rank this above the opening scene of Gladiator, because Gladiator, the
Ooh.
opening scene of Gladiator is good, but I can kind of tell the small scale that they could had to go by for production. Whereas
Mhm.
the one in Cold Mountain, I was like, wow, that looks huge. There's just a pile of people in a crater battling in a pool of blood. It was like, whoa, bro.
It's jaw-dropping the scope that
Yeah,
they go for it. Oh yeah. I mean, like we can give props to this movie. I know we kind of started with a little bit of like, it's a bittersweet kind of movie, but there's good stuff in this movie.
certainly. Yeah, I like, and I would even go as far as to say the overall production of the movie, very good.
Oh yeah, everything. The movie looks fantastic. I think they had Walter Murch edit this film. For those who don't know who Walter Murch is, he was the editor for The Conversation, editor for Apocalypse Now. The guy basically invented like being a sound designer in film. The guy's like S tier film editors.
Yeah, that's actually
Um,
another place I've seen this is a little vignette with him. It's during the editing of this film. He's like, it's kind of interesting because you think he'd be in like an editing bay in the studio somewhere.
mm,
Apparently, he just edited this at his standing decks in the top room of his like Victorian home, wherever he was. It's kind of funny when you get to see behind
the scenes on these things a little.
yeah.
But yeah, like the movie, I think overall is reasonable. I think it's one of those things where everything for a great movie is here, but there's all the little things that just miss the mark. And in terms of little things that piss me right the fuck off, let's go with the southern accents, because god damn it, Jude Law, Nicole Kidman, and Renee Zellweger all have the worst southern accents I've ever heard in my goddamn life. Okay? And it might just be because like I have family that is from that general area of the world, so I know what it sounds like normally. But like every time I heard, especially Renee Zellweger talk, I'm like, you were nominated for an Oscar for this.
Yeah.
Oof.
I mean, now Renee Zellweger and Jude Law are an interesting case study because
Mhm.
Jude Law on one side, right? The accent is very underdone, and you can barely notice it, and then at times you can notice how it's not great.
Yeah, and that I can give him some slack because he's English, I believe.
And
He's either
that's
English or
what
Welsh,
pokes
but
through
he,
some of the time.
yeah, he's. I understand. He's not an American, so like he didn't grow up around those kind of voices. Totally get it. Good.
And I mean, that's
But
where we
yeah,
all come from, technically, so it kind of is like,
yeah.
or at least all of his kind come from. Um,
His kind. Oh wow, you would have fought for the South, you racist. But
no,
yeah,
I was actually in a different country at this point.
gotcha.
But opposite of that, Renee Zellweger is so over the top that I almost at one point was just like, at least it's like part of her character. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I'd almost rather the overcommit go so that I'm sitting there like, well, she's also physically acting well. The character is a very pushy, like rough and tumble person. So after a certain point, I was like kind of accepting hers and being like, it's cartoonish, but it is what it is.
I think that was my thing. I felt that her voice and some of her mannerisms were so over the top. It was kind of hard for me to like. It was hard for me to groove with the character a little bit. Like the scenes she was in, I felt like they were almost billed for like comedy. Like they were supposed to be a comedy bit in there because she's so over the top.
Hmm.
And granted, she's playing opposite of like Nicole Kidman, who's very. I don't. I don't even know how to describe Nicole Kidman's performance in this.
I liked it. I mean, I like her character. She's not given an easy route through the film. Like the character does have to go through her own trials and tribulations. So that's something I did like in. Well, again, she's technically the poster child for why we think that this is a weird Civil War movie because
Oh,
she's.
a little, yeah. Because
I
she's
still like that they were able to make it. They were able to make the mode of the story not she's the person waiting at home for her lover the whole time, that she had to go through her own physical challenges.
yeah. Also, this is another thing about the movie that I think is a brilliant thing, like a brilliant story mode, brilliant like motive for the film. So the whole crux is that Jude Law, Nicole Kidman, so Inman and Ada,
Hmm.
they fall in love and they're pining for each other to come back, but they even make a note about it that they only shared one kiss before he went off to war, and they had maybe a handful of words exchanged between them. But it becomes a thing where to Inman, he like idolizes Ada and being like, she is home to me. Like, I want to go back home and she is that to me. And for Ada, it's almost the same thing. Like he is the peace and world that got torn apart by the war. He is, the good of the world got off. When he comes back, everything's going to be normal again. And I think that's interesting because I don't know if they actually love each other. In other that they love what they represent to each other, which is a really interesting like romance to go on, because like you watched the same movie I did. They shared how many scenes together? How much screen time do they actually share together in the entirety of the movie?
Couldn't have been more than 10 scenes at most.
I would say even less than that. I think they may have been on screen together for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe. On screen together. Maybe 10 minutes out of this 2.5 hour movie.
Right.
And I think that's kind of interesting. I don't know. It's an interesting like romance, is what I'm saying. And I think it's really well written.
Yeah, and I do think that the thematic significance of their romance is much more the important part of the story than it is just their characters being together. And oftentimes that can be something I'm quite annoyed with a lot of the ways modern romance is portrayed in movies. Like, that's not to say that something like Skyscraper with The Rock is at all comparable to Cold Mountain, but it's like I like that they stay true to the fact that love in the what is this? I always get confused. It's the 19th century. That would be.
Yeah, it'd be the 19th century, but it's you just say the 1800s. It's in the 1800s.
Or in frontier America, as it's probably most often referred to, that a lot of this was function, not fashion, and their love, while yes, being on top of physical, and they respect each other. And there's at least a few nice character moments that bring them together, like the sheet music scene. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I like that they don't stray away from the fact that part of the reason they want to get home to each other is that she does represent home and a place where he is safe from this like false hope of war that they've all been brought to believe. Mm-hmm. And then for her, it's like just about the fact that he is not necessarily a man who can save her, but at least someone who can partner with her in against all of the world that, as one character says, the devil rules the roost. So yeah. I enjoyed that too.
So yeah, Cold Mountain. Overall, just a really weird movie.
A lot of interesting turns and twists and alcoves, and I'm interested to know because there's again very diverse second act in this as far as like moments and settings go. What would you say that throughout the whole movie? Like, give me a top scene or a top 2 or 3 that you thought
anything with Phillip Seymour Hoffman. Literally anything with Phillip Seymour Hoffman. He is the sleaziest preacher ever, and it's so good. He is the funniest character in the movie. He is so weird. Anything with Phillip Seymour Hoffman. I think when they get like trapped in like the honeypot or whatever, where where the guy, oh, you guys can stay at my cabin. Oh, I'm gonna go hunting, hang out with my wife and her like 3 sisters, and I don't know why he's just so like funny and like memorable, and he's only in the movie for like 20 minutes.
Yeah, and that sequence, because mine would either be like all of Phillip Seymour Hoffman stuff, or I don't even know. Probably I would just go back to the war scene in the beginning, but I think that honeypot sequence is a good example of how the thematic moments of the movie, like we were saying earlier, are really the things that are good to take out of this. And if I'm going back to my writing advice, and the writing advice that a lot of books I've read have told me, it's that this movie is a good example of taking the larger themes that you want to cover or that you need to cover in the world of a story and making actual conflict and events happen for them so that you can put something on the page. Because, the theme of temptation, the theme of love, it's all good and great in your mind, but if you can't come up with a compelling scene for it, you're dead in the water. And that was a compelling scene.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, like, this cast is insane.
Oh, yeah.
And it annoys the shit out of me. Like, again, like, if anybody wants to, they can go on and they could just look at the IMDb, because this cast is super stacked, and it's really weird because, like, half of these people could have just been, like, walk-on performances. Like, what is it? Phillip Seymour Hoffman's a glorified cameo.
Pretty much. Like, and that's how he's in a lot of stuff that he does throughout his career. He does a lot of weird character pieces that are just like, he's another Brad Pitt, if you want to. Or really, Brad Pitt is probably another Phillip Seymour Hoffman, because, again, Phillip Seymour Hoffman is like an acting god. But, yeah, it's interesting, because there were even people on this that were kind of unrecognizable actors that I couldn't quite see the name for it. Like the pale gentleman. You know exactly who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I couldn't figure out who he was in the cast.
That's Charlie Hunnam, or Hunnam. He has a really weird last name that I can never understand how to pronounce because there's like two N's in it.
Because the face now makes sense to me. I haven't seen Sons of Anarchy. I know it's a great show, but I never watched it, so it didn't come to me. But yeah, I mean, that's another thing you might take away from this, by the way. Even though the accent is one thing, but Renee Zellweger's character is another good point of this, is that even when you're not quite making a comedy or something like Raising Arizona, where the characters are over the top, this is still a good movie about how characterization is key. Because that Charlie Hunnam, who plays Bosie, I mean, for God's sakes, if not just looking at him throughout the movie because of how like reflected white he is, it's kind of like looking at a phantom. But because he plays such an evil character, it's like it does the character that much better.
Oh yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up because in the comedies, like the over top characters play for comedy. This is like, we're gonna have these over the top characters play, and they're gonna play for drama, and it kind of works because we have some characters that are way over what they should be. Like Ethan Suplee, who plays Pangle. He doesn't play an idiot. He plays the biggest idiot. He plays like Lenny from Of Mice and Men.
Yeah.
But Lenny from Of Mice and Men is like his Harvard professor. Like, he's maximum idiot.
Yeah.
And then you have like Boise, who is not just the evil henchman. He is the most evil of evil henchmen. We're gonna make him look like the fucking Phantom of Death. He's gonna be that much of an evil henchman. And look, and Brandon Gleeson is gonna be the best like reformed deadbeat dad you could find.
Oh yeah.
And it's all the characters are like, something is dialed up to 11 on each of them, and it all works.
Yeah, and I guess a final note I want to make real quick is that, and this is again one of those things that, because we're about to break into it, the one thing I like about this movie most that I didn't quite get out of Glory most of the movie, I wouldn't say that it's totally not there, but I really like how like brutal Cold Mountain is. How the story is just unrelenting in its darkness. Like, everything from like the finger squishing scene. Oh my gosh! To like,
it made me squirm in my chair.
Yeah, like even like the what is it? It's a scene right before they go into the honey pot when the cow's dead in the river.
Oh yeah, like, and they're like, we got to get this cow out of the water. Well, I got this hacksaw.
Yeah. Like, there's all kinds of moments where you really just start to see how, like, unabashedly brutal the landscape of this time was. And I like that they didn't shy away from that.
Yeah. I like that, too. It's very interesting when they show, like, really weird aspects of like history like that.
Yeah.
But now to talk about the movie that actually, took cues from real history, Glory. We'll talk about it right after this or this
uh,
or that.
okay, how about this?
Okay, we'll go after this.
Dean, I found a great way for us to do something cool and to make a little money on the side.
Great. I've been looking for a new place to put my money. What do you got?
No investment needed. In fact, it's super easy, and there's creation tools we can use to record our podcast right from the phone or computer.
Wait, why would you record a podcast on your phone? You want? No, never mind. Where do I put my money for this?
I don't need any of your money. We can even get our podcast distributed to big streaming platforms like Spotify and Google Podcasts.
Oh, I get it now. We're talking big business here, okay? So you're going to need a lot of money from me. How much money are we talking here?
No, definitely don't need any of your money. In fact, we can make money from the podcast with no minimum listenership.
Okay, now I think I'm getting what you're going at here. We need to spend money to make money, so we're talking some big gains here. Big gains.
No, definitely no. I don't need any of your money. Just all we need to make a podcast right in one place.
Okay. So what you're telling me is that you're gonna need a pretty big check from me for this podcast. So do I just make it out to cash? Because it's no problem for me. I'll just write it up right now.
No, listen, Dean, just head over to anchor.fm and check it out. You'll see why Anchor is the best place for us to record, edit, and distribute our podcasts. And I definitely do not need any of your money.
Shut up and take my money. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Double Feature Podcast second half. We're talking about Glory here on our March of War month for the week of Civil War stuff. So yes. Yeah, Glory.
This sequel to Ferris Bueller's Day Off is quite the interesting take on the American Civil War.
I mean, kidding. Like, it's weird. I was waiting for Cameron to show up with a Ferrari, and they were just gonna like drive Denzel to Canada or something. It was gonna be cool.
Yeah. So, yeah. I guess if I'm going to be quite brutally honest, everything about this movie I could not, and I continued not to be able to get over the fact that Matthew Broderick just was not believable in the main role.
Really?
I couldn't get over it, dude. He looks, it's like just Ferris Bueller. That's all I could see. And I get it. He's like a very classically and talented actor. But I don't know. He just has this boyish face that I was like, yeah, I don't know, man. Captain? Really?
That Colonel, actually.
Oh, yeah. Excuse me.
But yeah, that is a problem with okay, so I guess that is probably one thing I can't argue with about this is Matthew Broderick, until he turned like 40 something, he looked like he was like 19. Like, granted, the guy, sorry you won the genetic lottery that you looked youthful and young for most of your life, but
yeah, what a problem to have.
I know, right? But yeah, it is weird because he's also like, he's way shorter than everybody in the movie. He looks just way younger than everybody in the movie, and they give him that big old like mustache and like goatee package to make him look older, but he does look like a 19-year-old kid playing dress up.
And aside from like a very loose Massachusetts accent, if we're going to be talking about accents, by the way.
Yeah, if we wanted to. Okay, in Cold Mountain, they attempted an accent. In Glory, all the actors do not attempt an accent at all.
Yeah. But yeah, aside from that, it's like, don't get me wrong, I like the character. And I do think by the end of the movie, he does a good job at taking the reins of it and really showing off the arc. But throughout the first half of the movie, I continuously was just like, I don't know if I believe this. Like, it wasn't until he started to do all like the harsh Colonel stuff that I was like, okay, now I'm starting to see that they're making him do brutal things, and that, okay, I get it. But yeah, like the first bit, like all the PTSD stuff, I continue just to be like, he just kind of looks like a scared boy, not really like a shell-shocked man.
I understand that, but I almost felt like that was good for the performance, because I actually have no idea how old the real Robert Gould was when he died. I actually have no idea.
Hmm.
But it almost plays into the whole thing where, oh, the guys who are sent off to war, men aren't sent off to war. Dumbass boys are sent off to war. And that's like, it kind of looks like that, or it's like, when the bombs are going off, these boys are shaking in their boots because they have to become men real fucking fast, or they're just gonna die. And it's a really interesting like portrayal, and it's the thing where it's like I really loved his performance, but yeah, going back to your thing, physically he just doesn't look the role, which
It's
is like,
it's kind of interesting because if you look at a picture of Robert Gould Shaw, he kind of does look like him,
really?
which is kind of a stab in. It puts a hole in my argument because I actually really enjoy when they can nail. Uh,
A
this photo
character's look.
maybe a little different, but there's a picture at the top of the Wikipedia page with a side profile, and I'm like, okay, I could see that, but
Yeah. Oh, and he was only 25? Okay, so look, I'm going back to it. No, I think Matthew Broderick might have been really good for this.
I guess,
I'm
yeah.
turning around. But yeah, so I think this might also lead into the other thing we were talking about with like Spartacus and Gladiator, where you know, how do you deal with portraying real events in film? But we'll say that for the summation because that's gonna be a long tangent. Let's just
Yeah.
talk about Glory real quick and have me enjoy it before we start poking it apart, because I really like this movie. I think because I saw this in like a fucking history class in like middle school, and I thought this movie
That
was
makes total
awesome.
sense.
Makes total sense. This
Yeah.
is that movie.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I don't know. Do you have anything you want to start off? Like the performances in this movies are great, right?
Pretty good performances. I think that overall, the one thing that kind of hurts the movie for me from the get go and until the end is there's kind of a softish tone to everything.
Mm.
Like it's kind of like a really, Hollywood kind of there's a veil over the lens kind of tone. But I again think that this movie still broaches all the difficult questions, and most obviously, at least broaches the most difficult question that Cold Mountain did not really approach. In that, oh wow, this war was about racism.
Yeah, it's like, oh, we have all these, black dudes fighting in the Civil War. They're the first black regiment in Union history. We kind of got to address some very baseline, like, the world was like this
Yeah,
in the 1800s things.
and they even point out at least because I'm not gonna lie, Dean. I don't know if you noticed.
I don't know.
A lot of Americans tend to they go back and look at history in kind of a rose-colored way.
Yeah.
In that sometimes you'd probably run across a person and be like, the North was totally righteous and we were all on the right side of history. Well, like we said in the kind of at the top of the show, there were people who were fighting on the right side of history that weren't totally there, all there on the cause. And like you said, that makes everything about the film and the characters that show up in it more complicated and more dramatically valuable. But there's another side to this too that I guess the other thing I didn't enjoy so much. While this movie can be good at going through the whole show versus tell, song, and dance, there were still certain moments where I was waiting for characters to break into the right kind of like. I was waiting for that that classic "This is the movie's greatest line," or the good speech out of the general before they charge into battle.
You were waiting for the war movie stuff.
Yeah, and we got that out of one scene with the scene where Morgan Freeman is giving the prayer to the regiment the night before storming the fort, and Denzel gets a good character moment, although he's not quite able to speak his mind. As far as like, there were moments where basically I was waiting for the character to say something because I could tell they wanted to say it, or like that was what I was expecting them to say.
Mm-hmm.
But then, it was the kind of thing where it's like, okay, I get maybe he's, like, if we're staying true to character, not quite able to put what he wants to say into words. Or opposite of that, maybe they just don't want to, like, kind of get on a soapbox about things. I can
Yeah.
respect that, but I think it was still left wanting a little bit more quotability out of this movie.
I can kind of get it because this is one of those movies where I feel like a lot of people have seen this movie, right? Like this is probably a rather popular Civil War film.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, if we're showing it in middle school classrooms across America.
Yeah,
This was my first viewing, but yeah, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people probably have seen this.
yeah. So it is kind of weird that a lot of people see this as a really popular Civil War movie, but it is one of those things where yeah, you it's probably kind of hard to bring up glory in casual conversation. I don't know many people would say this is their favorite movie.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I mean,
granted, I
I
mean,
also think it'd be kind of weird to be like, yeah, I actually really enjoy, out of all movies in the world, this one Civil War movie.
look, like I can get it because there is a point in the movie that like okay, when Denzel Washington's character Private Trip when he gets brought back cuz he leaves base or whatever cuz he's going to go and like get a pair of shoes from like a farm or whatever and they think he's tried to desert.
Mm.
So they're going to flog him in front of all the men and they tear off his shirt and like you see all the whip scars cuz he was a slave when he was in Tennessee when he was like way younger. And then, they do the flogging and he just doesn't just stone face and then he just starts like breaking down and crying or whatever and he's just like staring down Matthew Broderick. Like that scene, that shit hurt and I'm like this is the whole thing of the really fucked up things about the Civil War and about this regiment and about all that stuff that is boiled down to this scene to a fucking T and it's like that's the scene that'll stick with you out of this movie. If you're looking for a quotable line or a memorable scene, that's the memorable scene.
And maybe that's also like the double-edged point of the argument is that, like I said, this movie does a really good job at showing you rather than telling you. This scene being an excellent example of that. And by the way, on top of everything, yes, excellently acted by Denzel Washington because that moment when it's like closing in on his face and you can tell he wants to scream out, but like he keeps just like holding his lips together to keep it in and keep it his integrity. I mean, just excellent, excellent. But yeah, I mean, what else? What else excellent can we say about this movie? Now that I've said what I
The
didn't
negative.
enjoy so much, there were still plenty of positives.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. We'll start with some of the positives because I'm not gonna lie. I don't believe there's such a thing as a perfect movie.
Yeah.
Okay, there might be a few perfect movies, but we'll get into those much later. But this movie's not perfect.
Yeah.
There are negatives, there are positives, and let's talk about a little bit of the positives. The performance in this movie, I think across the board, even Matthew Broderick's, I think the performances are great, especially from Denzel Washington, Morgan Freeman, and oh god, Andre Braugher. He's the one who plays Thomas.
Yeah.
Like those three, they give amazing performances.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it's kind of weird because I understand it because they're dealing with the whole aspect of like race and that sort of stuff in like the military at this time, but then it's also just a straight like no, they're trying to harden these guys up for war and all this other stuff. What is it? The dialogue between the Irish drill sergeant and the corporal and the colonel. The colonel's like, "Hey, are you going a little too hard on Thomas?" And the drill sergeant is like, "Can I be frank?" And he's like, "Yeah. Do you know the man? Yeah, we grew up together." And the drill sergeant's like, "You might want to let him grow up a little more."
Yeah, that was another good point to this movie because just like like we've been saying, they raise all the right questions. There is the right question of, okay, we're empowering these men to fight for their freedom and for their rights, but is our treatment of them like we would treat any other soldier too harsh, or is that just the reality of how we need to prepare them for war? It's kind of broke. It's this really, all good writing should balance both like the very physical stuff and the very moral stuff, so that you're not just leaning on one or the other. Both of them combined make for good drama, and that was a very good character arc. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we also have this one is probably the most like this is kind of fucked up moment in the movie where the 54th Regiment, they are done. They're going out. They're going to the battlefield, or they're going to the front lines, and they meet up with the really racist colonel, racist Colonel Montgomery, who's like, "Oh, I'm in charge of the captured slaves, or the slaves that have been freed from the southern plantations. We recruited them into this battalion,
Right.
and they are, oof, that scene is real uncomfortable."
Certainly, yeah. It's that scene, just like how I said, Cold Mountain isn't afraid of approaching any of the brutality that was the Civil War South. This was another sequence that certainly was able to do that in his executing one of his men for just even putting his hands on a white woman is, a visual in itself that really should speak the reality of the history. And one that I can really commend the story for not turning a blind eye to.
Oh yeah, and the other thing is the slaves that they had brought in, because I believe it's portrayed in the movie. I'm not 100% sure on the historical facts of it. I'm very shaky on that, but I believe in the terms of the movie, all the men that are of the 54th Regiment, they are free men who have, lived in Massachusetts or lived in the North. They were not slaves at the time they were enlisted.
Mm-hmm.
But the regiment that Colonel Montgomery is in charge of, they were like straight slaves. Like, took them off the plantation and then put them in. And how they are acting and portrayed, they're portrayed very much like I'm trying to find like words that are not going to get me canceled. They're portrayed basically like they have no idea how to fight a war. Like, he's basically taking them out on like raids of town. He's just taking them in. Okay, there's no one in this town. Cool. Burn the whole town down and take everything that looks valuable.
Well, I think there's a line that kind of sums that up in a not so disrespectful way. Well, it is still disrespectful, but safe for the family way, I guess we could put it, is that they treat them like children, and that's at most what they can see them as, and it's like, it is interesting because it's such a jarring visual. While it's not quite, all blood and soot like Cold Mountain, just seeing them just like releasing a gaggle of freed slaves on a town to like loot and pillage because it's freedom to them. It's like, what difference does it make? And they're just taking advantage of those emotions. Yeah. It's definitely interesting. Yeah.
And it's crazy because it's also just juxtaposed with the true military fashion that the 54th carry themselves with, because they're information, they're standing, they got their rifles, they marched in like soldiers, and then the other regiment is like released and they're just like pillaging and raiding, and the 54th, they're standing like, what are our orders, sir? Like, we don't, what do you want us to do?
Yeah.
Like, we're soldiers, we're not this, like, what is this kind of thing? And it's really weird. This movie does approach like very complex stuff like that, and I commend it. It doesn't turn a blind eye to it. It just goes for it, and it's really cool.
Yeah.
I guess it's weird to say cool about exploring racism in the Civil War era, but it's real. It's very, like, I commend it.
Yeah,
but yeah,
it definitely.
But not the bad stuff.
I mean, okay, so here's one thing. And this is separate from the movies in their content, but I gotta say, I mean, one of the things that always can take me in or out of a movie is its soundtrack. Mm-hmm. And while Glories is, I get it, like, kind of very, it's a sign of the times for filmmaking, the late 80s sometimes had these more like canned studio kind of soundtracks.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Cold Mountain's music was really, really moving and appropriate at times. Like the mixture of non-diegetic and diegetic music to make up the emotional content of the music.
I know what you mean. It's really weird because like Cold Mountain has all like the high-end production value, and Glory feels like this was made very maybe on not the kind of scale that Cold Mountain was, My biggest gripe was okay, you know the battle scenes in the film, that not the fort. I mean, like when the 54th first goes into battle and they're in like the woods, right?
Okay.
Have you ever seen like History Channel Civil War reenactments?
Yeah, I kind of okay. Yeah, I get what you mean. Because I would say that not necessarily about that scene where they do a better job at masking it, but about that very first scene that
Hmm.
Matthew Broderick is in. That's the
Yeah,
one I would say. That was one where I could tell there's only about 50 people on set.
yeah. That's the thing, and I
Yeah.
understand like this movie probably didn't have the budget to cast like the thousand plus extras for big epic battle scenes, but
Yeah.
yeah, when Matthew Broderick and his company are charging into battle, and you can sit there and count the entire company on like two hands, it's a little off putting.
Or what it is for me too is just like the when you can notice depth. Like
Hmm.
the counting is one thing because there's only so many bodies you can fit on screen.
Yeah,
But when I can look through the bodies and see the end to the bodies, like on the other side of them, that on the other side is just a clear field.
yeah,
That's when I'm starting to be like, okay, this doesn't feel so much. It starts to feel like just like a reenactment, like I'm watching a History Channel live broadcast of a Civil War reenactment. And, that's contrasted, by the way, as you mentioned, by the ending scene. And even that forest scene, I think I started to notice less of it. But the ending scene is very well done. I like it on the beach and everything.
oh yeah.
Um,
I The ending battle, that's their big showstopper battle, right?
oh, yeah. And
That the
then,
war, yeah,
like you said, it's like, do they have the budget for three huge battles, which is what they're supposed to have in the movie? No. And I think they get away with it in the forest one because it's in a forest, it's very tactical. I think they do things to cover that up well. But yeah, it does kind of, when you compare the two, that scene at the beginning of Cold Mountain, the epicness is all on display because
mhm,
it's pretty much the only battle scene that they have in the movie. And
yeah,
then because there's three in Glory, it's like, we got to pick and choose our battles, so to speak.
yeah. But yeah, that's like kind of my gripe about the movie. That would be my biggest gripe is you can tell the budget of the movie, especially in the battle scenes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And maybe that's something we're learning about war movies this month is aside from everything else is that if you're going to tackle it correctly with a budget that can take on the task.
and you know what? With that, I think that might lead us into part three of our little podcast where we bring the movies together and talk about them in context with each other. But I think that also kind of helps me jump off with my question.
Sure.
So I asked this last time when we were on the podcast. What the what respect do filmmakers have to pay to historical events? Right? So with Spartacus and Gladiator, it wasn't really that much of an issue because Spartacus is a story that's been told however long. It happened thousands of years ago, so there's a lot of wiggle room you can do with like being able to portray those real people. Gladiator, it's a whole other thing. It's a fictional story that uses the reality of Roman war culture and all that stuff to tell its story, but it's a fictional story. In this, we have this again. Cold Mountain, fictional story, but it's set in a very real place. There are real battle. The opening battle, that's a real battle that actually happened. Shit ton of people died. We can go to there if you really wanted to. And then with Glory, this is about real actual people and their real actual, battalion, the real actual company, and them really dying at the end of the movie. So like what do you think the filmmaker kind of has to bring into that? Like how much respect are they going here? On the scale of like 1 to 100, like how much respect is paid here?
Well, so this is an interesting case study in that question because, like you said, last week we're dealing with a subject that is very shrouded in, I guess you could call it epic fantasy, where
Mm-hmm.
the events of things, we don't. The record keeping back then was only so advanced, and we can't go back and get the accounts so well. So yeah, it does have to be filled in, and I think most of the argument last week was really about like set design and costuming and things like this.
as long as you can make it, walk like a duck, if it doesn't sound like a duck when it quacks, you're good enough.
Yeah, and then everything else is kind of left up to intuition and imagination to fill in the blanks. And as a result, if you're doing that kind of thing for that kind of film, it works. But this week is definitely an interesting change to that question because we start to deal with the first war that we had firsthand accounts from. Like the Revolutionary War is all paintings and writing and all this stuff, but this is where we start to have things like photographs and recordings and actual things we can look at and measure history from them. And it's interesting too because one, like you said, is more based in imagination and the work of the writer to come up with the story, whereas the other one is based solely on historical event. So there's kind of like two ways that you can go about the question, I guess, and one is good and one is not so good. I guess Cold Mountain for me, what we said earlier about it being like, does it really have to be a Civil War movie because of what it ends up being?
Yeah,
it's like, aside from like all the set design and stuff, which at this point in history should be fairly accurate,
Yeah, I think that's baseline. Like if you're doing a war movie, baseline, you have to be able to get the weapons and the like uniforms and stuff like that right. Baseline. If you can't do that much, you have no right to make a movie.
And oddly enough, I do think Cold Mountain does a good job at that because one thing I don't enjoy about a movie like Glory is that they make it apparent that it wasn't as messy as we probably thought it was. That everybody's still in line and they're shooting in a line and that their hats are still on by the end of the battle. Whereas Cold Mountain, it's like rough and tumble, absolute massacre carnage.
Yeah, total chaos out of the gate. Like as soon as your lines get within like spitting distance of each other, formation breaks. It's just blood and guts and just trying to kill more of them than they kill of you.
Yeah, and so that was one thing I think that did versus Glory. Though I don't think that Glory does an inaccurate representation of it, but maybe that's my point, is that I think at times Glory, I think, tries to do too much honor to history and like how it was, to a point where it's almost like sterile. And I wish there was a little bit more grit and emotion and sweat like there is in Cold Mountain.
I can see that. It's one of those things where after a point Glory started feeling like a history lesson more than a movie.
Yeah, and while I'm sure certain things like the fireworks that were like colored red, white, and blue during the siege of the fort, yeah, that's probably a little bit of creative liberty in order to come up with like the color palette for the shots.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I'm like, you could go a little further than that. Like, give me something, and maybe it also comes down to just plain old cinematography too, because both scenes are shot differently.
Mm.
But with the slow mo and like the very like glorified shots in Glory versus Cold Mountain, it's handheld camera, up close and personal with the epic wides. I don't know. Maybe it's just like that shooting style I like more too. I mean, it's not so much a history choice, but
yeah. I mean, I guess that comes down to the thing where Cold Mountain feels more akin to a realistic looking battle versus in Glory, where it feels maybe not even like stylized. It just doesn't feel like, it just doesn't grab you the same.
Yeah.
Right? It leans on your emotional connection to the characters to kind of like sway you in the battle scenes,
yeah,
more than the spectacle. Where I think Cold Mountain kind of does the opposite, where it's like it's relying on the spectacle to like move you versus the characterization, because at the point in the Cold Mountain we don't know the characters that well at all.
Yeah, pretty much. So I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting way to transform the question. That now we have to consider, how do you recreate history when you have actual accounts of it? There's more information on how to recreate it. It's an interesting way to start to delve into that, and I would say both movies do it successfully in their own special ways. And that kind of brings us to another oft-asked question on the show is who these are for, and kind of does this make a good double feature? Because
That's the point of the podcast.
Yeah, I think that they don't make it so good of a double feature together. I'm not going to say it's a bad one, because I thought if I was to watch two Civil War movies, this is about approximation, you could do these two and it would be okay.
Yeah.
You might also be, now that I think about it, you might also be crazy if you're looking to watch a couple of Civil War movies on your spare time.
I mean, maybe you're like, I'm a history buff and I'm bored. Like,
yeah,
I could see people looking these out if you're looking for war movies.
Yeah, I would certainly say that Glory is more you're a history buff or you're in a middle school or high school classroom watching this. It's probably more your taste. But Cold Mountain, opposite of that, a history buff may or may not actually like it. It's not for middle school kids, that's for sure.
Oh,
It's
God, no.
Very hard rated R movie in my mind. But I don't know. I think if you're into the drama of Cold Mountain or into the actors or like a more character-driven movie, it's a pretty good movie at the end of the day. And I would recommend it for that reason.
I would agree. I think both of these movies work if you're looking for more character-driven kind of war movies. Because, like, Cold Mountain, it's pure character-driven, all that other stuff. We have good performances across the board. Glory, I feel it's almost the same way, where we have very good character-driven story. It's good performances across the board. I think this kind of works as a good double feature. It just comes down to the audience for this. If you're into the Civil War, you're a history buff, and you're looking for movies that are really... And you're also looking for just really good movies that may take liberties with history.
Yeah.
These would probably be a pretty good pick. But yeah, I guess the only other thing I could really ask you is, if you only had one, you only had a few hours, you can only watch one of these this weekend, which one are you watching?
I think I would still go with Cold Mountain.
Really?
Only because at the end of the day, listen, the average viewer, including me, I don't think is looking for a history lesson out of a movie. And while I really do like Glory, for the reason of being educational or inspiring, if you want to go that far, I still enjoyed the drama and the story of Cold Mountain more. Like, it kept me more engaged by the end of the movie with the characters and the conflict of the story.
See, I'm kind of on the other end of that, because I feel like Cold Mountain was, though well performed, well acted, I felt more engaged with the characters in Glory more. I think like Glory works. I understand Glory does at times feel like it's a little bit of a, History Channel movie, right? It feels like that at some points, but I feel like the performances are very engaging. I feel like it's also, I feel like it's paced a lot better than Cold Mountain. I feel Cold Mountain has a few points that have a little bit of a drag to it, but I think Glory paces itself a little bit better. I think it's a breezier watch.
Yeah.
But I don't know. That we're kind of at an impasse here. Let's see if we can compromise. So, David, what are your arguments? You got a Cold Mountain. Why do you think? Who do you think is going to watch Cold Mountain over Glory?
I mean, like I said, it's going to come down to what the audience is looking for out of the movie. If you're looking for something that is a little bit more a fantasy you can get into for a little while, then Cold Mountain's going to be for you. Like, if you're looking for more emotional payoff in the movie. Because
more of the sweeping epic style of storytelling.
Yeah, well, anybody can root for the characters in Glory. It's that because of what the characters are going through, is it quite as relatable? Yeah, that's a different question, because Cold Mountain has a love story and it's about very physical conflict versus moral conflict. There's those things about it. So I don't know. I mean, like I said, I think it really just comes down to what subject matter is correct for the viewer.
Yeah, I can agree with that. It depends on who you're talking to, really.
Yeah.
If you want the big grand sweeping epic, go with Cold Mountain. If you're looking for a little bit more of a person, or maybe not even a person, but a more like intimate kind of story that's a little bit more specific, Glory is probably where you want to go. But that's up to the viewer. But I think that might leave us at the end of our little discussion about Cold Mountain and Glory on the Civil War week.
Yeah, I guess to lighten the load for a moment, and to sum, because this just came to mind, to summate our verdict on it is that if you're looking for Matthew Broderick's rosy red cheeks, go with Glory. If you're looking for Jude Law's hot and sweaty cheeks, go with Cold Mountain.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah. There's probably more lewdness to that comment than my tone of voice is letting on, but you know.
Yeah,
what I mean.
yeah. It's a little weird. But yeah,
hey, I'm just saying that's what part of Cold Mountain is.
It is. Yeah. Jude Law is fucking. He looks so gross throughout that movie.
So gross, and then all of a sudden during the sex scene, he was just like showered and totally like.
Oh yeah,
cut
during the sex scene, it's just like baby oiled up, lathered down.
Yeah,
I've
muscles
suddenly
the size of boulders, even though he's been starving for weeks on end.
We have now made scores of women want to watch Cold Mountain over Glory. All right,
definitely.
But there you go. So overall, pretty good pairing. Maybe not the best double feature, but a solid one if you wanted to kill a weekend. But David, what do we have coming up next week on our March to War?
Well, on our March to War, we're taking 2 more paces here into the First World War, or the Great War, as it was known as the time. And what a great pair of movies we got next week. We're going to be going through All Quiet on the Western Front, based on the very famous novel, and The Grand Illusion, one of, apparently, Orson Welles' favorite films ever.
Yes. These are going to be some 2 big ones for our podcast, because All Quiet on the Western Front actually knocks out Mr. Smith Goes to Washington as the oldest film we will be doing on our podcast. And The Grand Illusion will be the first foreign film we do on our podcast. So next week is a big show up of first for our podcast. And for our First World War movies. There you go. It all comes together. This wasn't by accident, I swear.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's do the wrap up then. Everybody, if you wanted to listen to more of our podcast, hear more of our voices, check us out on anywhere podcasts can be listened to. Google Podcasts, our sponsor Anchor FM. David, you want to keep going? Because there's a lot of them. I think we're on Spotify too. We're on all of them.
Yeah,
basically.
Anywhere you can find podcasts except for Apple Music, because, for some reason it's just red rope just to get into Apple Music, if you know.
Oh, yeah. You had to be good to get in there.
But you can find us anywhere, including you can find us, if you'd rather watch, on YouTube and look at all those pretty little graphics I make every week. You can follow us on there at In the Frame, our YouTube channel. Keep up with us there. We also got another show, Too Obscure for TV, that comes out on all those platforms. You can find us on Instagram at, if I'm correct, Dean, because I'm terrible with @names, _feature podcast.
Yeah, our double feature _ podcast. You can look at us there.
Confuse it, but I'm glad you're there to make the save.
We try. We're going to try and post more on there. We're kind of lazy about it, but our YouTube channel, we're really consistent about it. You can always check us out there.
Where it matters, folks. Where it
really matters. Well, yeah. So, can't wait to see everybody next week at the double feature. David, see you later, you Yankee bastard.
Give him hell.
All right. Cool.
All right. See you next week.
See you next week.